Hi everyone, it's Natalie here. So I've tried filming this a couple of times because I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm saying about this deck. So I'm looking at the Trionfi della Luna, and that means Triumph of the Moon in Italiano. This is a brilliant deck. I'm just gonna say it. I bought this last February or January, sometime right after I'd started the channel, because I thought I would go back into working with pip decks right away. And so I acquired like at least 3 or 4 that I, took pip work in a, pip deck work in a completely different direction. And this is one of them. It is in a tuck box, but it's just genius. So this is the paradoxical version, and it does show up under black light, which is really beautiful. It's just a beautiful deck. So I picked it up last night because it was Halloween last night, and I was sitting waiting, for kids to give them candy and stuff. And as I was doing that, I thought, I'm going to pull this out because I feel attracted to it. I felt like I really was like, yeah, it's time to work with that deck or at least look at it. And I couldn't figure out why I was attracted to it initially. I think I was considering like I'd like to look at working with more pip decks. And in part that comes from a recognition that what I'm doing at the moment, and it's probably what I've always been doing, is reading a play or reading a story and looking at the way I set cards out. And I tend to like to set them out in an arc, right? If I'm not using a specific spread, or I like to work in threes. Okay. I realized last night when I look at a pip deck in particular, that what I'm seeing is, characters. Okay, the major characters of the story. I'm seeing the major themes taking place with the characters, right? Or in the case of the Emperor, the characters whose plots dominate the entire play, right? Whose personal character plots form like the biggest part of the play. And I'm looking at their props. Okay, I'm looking at props and scenes. And so the scenes are made up of the cards, which include the props, like, in this case, the wands or batons, the plot of the scene or the setting of the scene, what the theme of the scene is about, right? And so forth. And then the way that those props integrate in with the characters and the scene and so on and so forth. Okay, so as I was doing that, it led me on this really interesting little journey, contemplating that even further. Okay, so we know look at that. So we know, for example, I'm going to set them up this way on purpose. Okay, we know, for example, sorry this is so messy, everybody. I'm like all over the shop here right now. Judgment, okay? If I were reading these 3 cards, Judgment is, for me, going to be the overall theme of this spread, of this scene in this play. When I look at the Page of Cups overindulges in whatever they're overindulging in. It could be emotions, it could be alcohol, obviously. That's I think the most obvious thing here. Whatever it is that they're indulging in, you can see, it causes this wave. The water is choppy as it is. This is hurting him. And it's really the overindulgence in drink or the overindulgence in emotion. drowning one's sorrows or temperament that is overly fluid, etc. It dictates that person's entire character. Okay, the nighttime character, melancholic, etc. Right? And I realized how much last night, how much of the theater training that I've had really influences my read of tarot cards. I mean, I did learn while I was in undergrad and I was studying theater, which makes sense. And we know that Pamela Coleman Smith was also, a theater practitioner. And so I think I didn't bring them out. I probably should have, but we can see in her deck, there are certain cards that are just stage cards. And I remember when I did a lot more directing than I do now, I was always referring to tarot as a point of like, this is that scene. Something I realized after I filmed the first part of this, right, where we've got the cups in this order, because I watched how they came out, was they came out initially like this, right, and we have him over here. This, for me, would change the entire reading of these three cards. With this chorus of coins going to talk to Judgment and tell on the page, we have an upstage scene here for me and a downstage scene here. So we've got this Page of Cups drinking his life away, wallowing in his emotions that are clearly toxic. Could be toxic self-hatred that he's wallowing in, etc. But over here, we've got his chorus of wealth and pentacles and coins commenting on that situation with Judgment, right? And ultimately then turning their back on him. So he is being brought to justice, or brought to, he's facing judgment, or about to face judgment as a result of his sin here, of gluttony of some description, wallowing in whatever he wallows in. Completely different read. Here, Judgment's watching may or may not be connected to him, but the coins are connected to him and he becomes the center focus. So all of the characters, all the plot, all of the action is centering around the Page of Cups, right? It changes again. Let's see, if we go here, we may have this scene happening downstage right, or downstage left. While upstage, we've got Judgment watching this man's interaction with his wealth and goods in a way that's deeply unhealthy, greedy, etc. And we know then in another scene, this guy is really going to get it, right? Something's going to come back and bite him, literally, metaphorically. In some way, his wealth is disappearing, and in some way it's being encouraged, right? If we go here, again, he is the center of attention, but, Judgment is also... Judgment and the sin of what he's doing has been, he's got some awareness in this situation that judgment is being made of him. And it is coming between that fear of sin, that recognition of being judged, that recognition of what I'm doing is not great. is coming between him and, you know, his habit and so on, is coming between him and his money. Yeah. And his ability to continue doing what he's doing. So he may be reconciling this in himself, for himself, in a way that in the other two cards he was not. For me, anyway. You know, in specifically when looking at more modern plays, like say, and I mean modern in terms of time period, so we're looking at like late 1800s into early 1900s, right? That's the modern era. It's not the same thing as contemporary, right? This is a contemporary deck based on some classical decks that are from the classical era, or more classical era, than what we're living in now. I could get even more geeky on that. Those of you who are super geeked, you'll know what I'm saying and be irritated and want to correct me, and that's okay. I'm sorry. But for the sake of the majority of folks trying to follow what I'm talking about, you know, if we look at most plays that we're doing right now are going to be from a point in time where we're using prose language, right? Dialogue that just sounds like everyday life, and which is naturalistic in some way. Well, these cards are obviously not very naturalistic. They're referencing a particular moment in time, seen through a contemporary lens. Most of the decks I have one really ugly Grimaud Marseille, which is like the first one I ever learned with. But even this one, it's a reproduction based on old cards, but they're, you know, it isn't, these aren't the actual ones, right? Even still, we could say that in some respects, looking at the decks is a lot like looking at theater from that time period, because, as you know, when you're studying theater from that time period, what do your teachers do? They send you to the art museum, especially if you're studying in London. They say, go to the National Gallery and go spend a few hours every week and just take in paintings, okay? So that's what I would do, especially because they're free. And, you know, when you're a student, you're always poor. And even once I was teaching, that's what I would do because it was so much fun. And it was addictive. I just wanted to go and look. So when I look at these cards, I feel like I'm looking at a Jacobean era play, right? Especially, when I look at like the court cards of, say, the swords. Well, really any of them in this deck, because of the use of blood. You know, there's so much reference to blood. You know, the threat in this deck of God or of punishment is a very real one. You know, the wielding and carrying of swords on a daily basis is a very, you know, this is that time period. All right. So when we look at this type of a deck, we're looking at a point in time in history when it was not normal to go out of the house without carrying a weapon, because you just never know. And it, at least, you know, the carrying of a weapon protects you from the possibility that somebody will try and hurt you, right? Because if they see you have a weapon, maybe they don't know how well you use it, etc. Okay, it's a very harsh world. Again, what I said about, you know, heaven and hell still prevails. This one's a lot more medieval looking. Although we could argue that a lot of the images in here are very medieval. But yeah, I mean, and this one's much later. You know, we're looking at 250 years later or something. This is more like Renaissance, right? So we're looking more like 1650, 1680. So this is really spanning a broad time period, but one where the world was a very simplistic place, right? What this says about the Queen of Wands with this chorus behind her of slightly demonic looking well, they're not really demonic. We have one forked tongue, and it's kind of a chorus of spirits. I'm looking for this queen of, like there's our king of swords, right? We've got one face that is being presented that looks rational, dignified. You know, he's holding his sword aloft so you can see it. He's holding it in a way that if you've ever studied combat, and I have, because if you do classical actor training, you have to. It's part of your training. You're not going to hurt somebody with a sword holding it like this. You're just not. It's being held symbolically. But yet we've got, and we've got his lovely sleeve, but then we've got at the back, where you can't see it, we've got the tongue out, right? There's a devil in his back, and we've got a bare arm. His left arm has definitely been used. He's used that dagger to stab somebody, right? We've got something sort of savage and primal back here with something very civilized up here with the building. That kind of imagery is just brilliant. Oh yes, here we go. I wanted her. Similarly, the Queen of Swords, she's much more transparent than he is. She's left a lot of damage in her wake, right? A lot of heaviness, heavy thought, heavy damage, and even people seeing her coming, right? We've got these wilted flowers. We know that whatever she's done, it's not good. She's got a bloody sword carelessly over one shoulder, and then the other sword in her left hand she's dragging across the ground. And her facial expression tells us she's either completely exhausted and unlikely to get us, or that she is kind of taking a break in her rampage, right? And she's going to lift this sword, she's dragging that sword to let you know she's coming, right? She's coming for you. This is over the shoulder more transparently. She's taken blood. She's not afraid to take some more. Get in her way, and she will hold two swords and fight you with both of them. And again, in training, we learned how to fight with two swords at once, or with a rapier and dagger, like the King of Swords has here. He doesn't really have a rapier. He's got a sword and a dagger. But suffice it to say, you learn how to work with these different weapons, and the way that they're holding them tells you a great deal. So, yeah. When I look at, back to these three, when I look at these three cards, oops, they were in this order. What I'm looking at is, holy judgment from God. This is not about resurrecting. This is not about being resilient. This is about suffering the fires of hell because, and being judged and having to reconcile with your sins. And what is this sin? It's gluttony in some form. All right. And then what do we have over here? We've got this, we've got these coins. And something I've noticed about the coins in this deck is that they all have faces. So when we look at reading with the Tarot de Marseille, for example, all right, and here's my, it's mostly wands I've picked up. We'll find some gazes in here. Not very many. Here we go. In a Tarot de Marseille, we're following the gazes, right? Here, we could almost, they're passing the buck. I don't know. I immediately want to tell a story. Anyway, we can see that they're gazing in a particular direction. Let's give them something to gaze at. Let's say, here we go. Right? The star could actually be a specific archetypal character, right? This could be a very virginal, pure woman, who is, there's all sorts of stuff that could be happening here. Right? But we're following gazes, right? And it's always interesting when they're looking directly at you, I think, too, in a traditional tedium deck. Um, giving you a direct address, so to speak. In this deck by Valenza, it's harder to follow the gazes, but they're very directional, right? He's looking straight ahead, and yet there's something going on back here. He gives you more to play with, actually. He gives you a lot more to play with. But something else that's a part of what you can play with in this deck exists, I found, in the suit of coins. Where gazes are concerned. I just had a few more. So there's one gazing here and one gazing that way. And generally speaking, what I found in the deck, you know, all of these coins are different. So from one coin card to the next, the actual faces on the coins are different. And generally speaking, the odd coins look to the left. The even coins look to the right. Okay, so they're almost, you know, from my knowledge and training, they are almost a chorus. We've got an extra facet here in this particular suit that to me functions almost like a chorus, which takes us into a completely different facet of classical training, and into a world where I think this deck is also existing, especially when you look at the Magician card, which is close to Commedia dell'arte. Here we go, here he is, right? Where you get the masked characters. And this is this magician is just brilliant. The way he's distracting us, right? Look up here, look here, but don't see the dagger, right? He's got 3 legs. Dropped the ace and, you know, these 2 aces under the table. You know, he's a total shyster. He's going to cheat you the hell out of everything. You know, just, he's not even two-faced. He's multiple-faced, right? He's kind of like, it's brilliant. So, God, so good. Okay. So again, oh, I lost my coins. The coins went somewhere in here. Let's find a coins card that faces left. Where did they all go? Here we, nope, wrong way. Because we had left facing, I think it was the 7. Yeah, it's this one. So, or it was at least a left-facing deck or card. So we've got this guy who's guilty of the sin of gluttony. He's about to be reconciled with it. And, you know, the finances, his own finances are staring him down, right? His own money, his own wealth, the things he owns, the things he depends on, you know, are given this kind of opinion about him, and maybe feeding his ability to continue doing this, right? They might be egging him on. If they were facing the opposite, here we go. If they were facing the opposite direction and turning, you know, his resources were turning their backs on him, he might be left alone in this, right? We might say that he's doing this to his detriment. And, you know, let me be clear. This isn't maybe the way I would read this in every deck. Sorry, throat gunk there. But in this particular deck, we have this opportunity to look differently at what we're seeing here. So these, you know, there might be some judgment additionally coming from the chorus, but they're also egging him on. In this one, they might actually genuinely be judging him and abandoning him and saying, you know, you've lost us, you've lost all your resources, we're going to walk this way off stage and leave you in your judgment and in your gluttony. Whereas these are saying, we're not leaving you, we're feeding you. We're going to give you more resources so you can continue drinking, even if it means you use all of us up. So, yeah, I think maybe I don't know. I'm there's a lot I want to say about this deck, and about the way I've changed kind of my reading style. I mean, something that is immediately striking to me as well is like he's taking a lot of his images from the Minchiate decks, or the Minchiate decks, of that era. And so some of his choices, for example, he's got extra choices for the Tower, Judgment, the Star, the Devil. They're not just coming from other Tarots de Marseille. They're also, they're referencing the Trionfi decks, or, you know, that were, obviously, that this one's based upon, but which were part of the Minchiate system, or Minchiate system as well. Like the lightning, I know for sure does not come from. It's not really a TDM. It is again. It's more of a Minchiate style of tarot, which actually uses 97 cards, and the extras are trumps. So yeah, there's a lot to be said here. This is also a Minchiate reference, I think, later on. Yeah. At any rate, yes, he's referencing, you know, a whole pantheon of different concepts and ideas in this deck that I think is just genius. I love this Fool. This Fool is so brilliant. I love that he's kind, you know, this could be talking out of your ass. You know, he's got a little demon whispering in his ear. He's still kind of two-faced. He's drawn by the moon. And I mean, he's, you know, he's about to walk into the fire and assimilate. So the wilder part of him is back here, and the more like, oh no, I'm about to be civilized or shifted or changed in some way, or, you know, there's a lot of possibility there. A whole lot of possibility that you can play with. So yeah, there's more to talk about. I just really got excited about, you know, what I'm seeing with this deck, and what actually started to come about as a result of looking at it and spending time with it, and seeing different possibilities for how to read it and work with it. And I guess I should say too, a big part of that, a big part of what draws me to this deck as well, is that is something I haven't really mentioned very much, which is that I have been reading for the lines lately. And when you read for the lines, as we say in this community, you know, it's a different discussion. So we're not reading, you know, we're reading everyday life, but we're reading it in a very base kind of way, because we're talking about, you know, is somebody talking, you know, am I dating a fool, right? Literally. This isn't somebody who's going on an enlightened journey. This is literally a fool who's kind of, you know, just talking out of his ass. You know, the Hierophant representing, I mean, it's not what we're accustomed to when we start looking at what takes place with the Golden Dawn interpretation of these things. You know, this really is the mouth of hell. You know, in the mouth of the demon, taking these people in for their sins. It's that world. There is nothing enlightened about this world yet. Okay, it is very base. It is brute strength. You know, it is blessings that are sanctioned by the church, which holds all the wealth and the money and the resources. It is, you know, it is a critique of the people who hold the wealth, right? And what type of person they are. So, you know, as characters in this play. So, or whew, look at this. There's a big judgment there. And possibility for what this means. Death is definitely death. but it's also rebirth. Oh, fascinating. So yeah, you know, it is, instead of the Queen of Coins being a gentle, nurturing person, we are dealing with someone who is greedy, fat, gluttonous, and who will take this, you know, let them eat cake, right? Take this coin and wallop these little demon guys for getting too close to her chicken. You know, she will not hesitate to smash them. And as the Queen of Swords we saw earlier, you know, she's out for blood. I mean, so this is, you know, this is wow. This Page of Coins, you know, the coin is like, doo, I'm flying away from you. You know, the coin's looking that way, following gazes, right? This Page of Coins is so lost, chasing after this one coin. He doesn't see that he's about to go stepping into a river. And look at that. Even his eyes are closed in his gut. He's not open to his own intuition. So we're seeing qualities about people, about situations, things that take place in everyday ordinary life, and that tend to be the kinds of things that if you're reading on the lines, people are coming to ask about. What are the relationship dynamics? Well, if you see this come up for your querent who's asking that question, I mean, there could be all kinds of things that represents, right? So it opens up the possibility of getting those answers very quickly and at a level that's very simple, very straightforward, and reads like a classical play, if you're me. You know, it sets the scene, it sets the stage, and it tells you who the players are, what the influences are, what the props are that they're using to carry these motivations out, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think I'm fascinated by the world of the Tarot de Marseille right now because of reading on the lines. It's not that the spiritual influences are not important. It's just, and I'm going to talk about this in another video, because I read for the lines with the Marielle Tarot, right? Which we've heard referenced by Marseille readers as being kind of like, you know, a fully pictorial Marseille style deck. Well, I'm curious. I've been curious for some time now. Why are people saying that? Why would they say that? And yet I find myself reading this deck in the same way that I would read this deck. I'm looking at, following gazes. I'm making a story. And I then started to recognize, okay, that could also be because I read every deck like I'm staging a play, right? And telling a story. All right, more to come in time. More to come in time. Thank you so much, everybody, and I'll see you soon. Bye.